You hesitate in trading not because you lack confidence, but because part of you is trying to protect an identity you haven't admitted you're protecting. Hesitation isn't confusion, it's preservation. It shows up when the setup is clean, when the rules align, when the entry is obvious. And instead of acting, you freeze. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you know exactly what's at risk. Not money, meaning. The meaning you've attached to being right, to being capable, to being the kind of trader who doesn't mess things up. Hesitation happens when taking the trade would turn potential into measurement. As long as you don't click, you can still be the trader who would have executed perfectly. The moment you act, that identity gets tested. And tests are dangerous to a system that equates mistakes with personal failure. So you wait. You watch price move without you. You feel the opportunity slip. You feel the familiar mix of regret and justification. I was being cautious. I was waiting for confirmation. It didn't feel right. Those explanations sound responsible. They're not. They're protective. They protect you from finding out whether your execution matches your self image. Here's what's really happening. When the setup appears, your nervous system runs a calculation. If I take this and lose, what does that say about me? If I take this and win, can I trust it? If I don't take this, I can't be wrong. That last option feels safest. Hesitation is the choice that avoids immediate pain, not financial pain, identity pain, the pain of seeing yourself clearly. This is why hesitation often follows growth. As you learn more, as your standards rise, as you care more about doing it right, the cost of being wrong increases, not in dollars, in self concept. You don't want to break the image you've built of being disciplined, aware, evolved. So you hesitate. You wait for perfect alignment, for extra confirmation, for certainty that never arrives. Meanwhile, the trade moves on. And afterward, you replay it. You see the entry, you see the follow through, you see the profit you didn't take. And instead of learning, you feel smaller, not because you missed money, but because you avoided yourself. That avoidance compounds. Each time you hesitate, you reinforce the belief that acting is dangerous, that waiting is safer, that inaction protects you. But protection has a cost. It slowly erodes trust. Trust in your read, trust in your rules, trust in your ability to execute under pressure. Eventually, you stop trusting yourself not because you fail, but because you never show up. This is the deeper truth most traders miss. Hesitation isn't about fear of loss, it's about fear of exposure. Exposure to results, exposure to feedback, exposure to who you really are when outcomes are no longer hypothetical. As long as trades stay theoretical, you can believe anything about yourself. Execution removes that comfort. It replaces belief with evidence, and evidence is unforgiving. Once you understand this, hesitation stops feeling mysterious. It becomes predictable. You start noticing the moment you're not waiting for the market. You're waiting for permission to stay who you are. That's the moment that matters. Because if you can act there, everything downstream changes. Not because you force confidence, but because you stop hiding from feedback. That's where this goes next. Hesitation survives because it gives you an illusion of control. As long as you don't act, nothing can contradict the story you're telling yourself. You can stay skilled in theory, disciplined in principle, capable in imagination. The chart becomes a place where you could have performed well, instead of a place where performance is measured. That distinction matters more than most traders realize, because the mind will always choose the version of reality where identity feels safest, and identity feels safest when it's untested. This is why hesitation often feels calm. There's no adrenaline spike, no panic, no chaos, just a quiet holding pattern, a sense of being above the moment, detached, observational, almost wise. But wisdom doesn't avoid commitment. Wisdom acts when conditions are met. Avoidance acts when conditions are uncomfortable. They look similar from the outside, Internally, they couldn't be more different. Watch what happens inside your thinking when a setup appears. Your mind doesn't say, I'm afraid. It says, let's wait one more candle. Let's see how this reacts. Let's make sure. Those thoughts sound disciplined. But notice the timing. They show up after alignment is already there, not before. That's the tell. Real patience exists before the setup. Hesitation appears after it. One is process driven, the other is self protective. This is where the internal logic breaks down. You tell yourself you're waiting for confirmation, but confirmation isn't infinite. At some point, waiting stops being refinement and becomes avoidance. And avoidance has nothing to do with market structure. It has everything to do with what the outcome would mean. If you enter and lose, you have to integrate that loss into your self image. Not as the market did something, but as I executed and this was the result. That's confronting because it removes ambiguity. No more I would have. No more I almost. No more next time. Just evidence. And evidence forces adjustment. Adjustment is growth, but growth requires friction. Hesitation avoids friction. It delays feedback in the name of safety. But delayed feedback is the slowest way to improve. This is why hesitation quietly caps performance, not because you miss one trade, but because you train yourself to associate execution with threat. Each time you don't act, you reinforce the idea that safety lives in waiting. Over time, that rewires your default response. You become excellent at analysis, excellent at observation, excellent at explanation, and inconsistent at execution, not because you're incapable, but because execution has become emotionally expensive. Here's the deeper layer. Hesitation often protects more than just identity as a trader. It protects identity as a person. If you've ever tied self worth to being competent, to being smart, to being above mistakes, then taking a clean loss feels heavier than it should. It doesn't just cost money, it threatens how you see yourself. So your system adapts. It finds a way to stay involved without being exposed. That way is hesitation. Watching instead of acting, knowing instead of doing. That adaptation keeps you comfortable. But comfort is not neutral in trading. Comfort has a cost. It costs trust. Trust in your rules. Trust in your read. Trust in your ability to handle outcomes honestly. Eventually, you don't hesitate because you're afraid to lose. You hesitate because you don't trust what will happen inside you if you do. That's the real bottleneck. And until it's addressed, no amount of confidence building will fix it. Because the issue isn't confidence, it's your relationship with feedback. That's where this turns next. Hesitation dissolves the moment feedback stops feeling like a threat, because feedback only hurts when it challenges who you think you are. When identity is fragile, every outcome feels personal. A loss isn't data, it's evidence. Evidence that something about you might not be as solid as you believed. So the system adapts. It delays action, it stretches analysis. It keeps you in observation mode where nothing can contradict the story. That adaptation works for comfort. It doesn't work for performance. Performance requires exposure, exposure to outcomes, exposure to imperfection, exposure to the reality that you're not supposed to be right every time. Once that reality is accepted, hesitation loses its leverage because there's nothing left to protect. You're no longer trying to preserve an image. You're trying to execute a process, and processes don't take losses personally. They adjust. This is where the internal shift happens. You stop asking, will this make me look bad? You start asking, does this meet my criteria? That single question changes how your body responds. Tension drops, timing sharpens, decisions feel quieter, not rushed, not forced, clear. You don't need certainty anymore. You need alignment. Alignment between what you see, what you planned, and what you're willing to execute without negotiating your standards. That alignment creates trust, not confidence hype, not bravado, trust earned through repetition. Each time you act when conditions are met, each time you accept the outcome cleanly, each time you don't rewrite the story afterward, that trust compounds. And as it compounds, hesitation stops showing up as something to fight. It shows up as information, a signal that identity is creeping back in, a reminder to return to process, to criteria, to execution. That's how hesitation becomes useful instead of limiting. It points you back to what matters. Once you relate to it that way, it no longer freezes you. It grounds you. And grounded traders don't rush, don't stall, don't hide. They execute when execution is required. They wait when waiting is correct. They accept feedback without collapsing into it. That's maturity in trading. Not intensity, not certainty, not perfection. Presence, presence with risk, presence with outcomes, presence with who you are while the market responds. When presence replaces protection, hesitation fades. Not because you forced it away, because it no longer has a job. As I said,